gender and rights-based frameworks for the enforcement of sexual and reproductive rights and health. And so in this session, there were 4 representatives from the International Planned Parenthood Federation who were talking about their implementation of comprehensive sexuality education policies in Latin America. And so they were talking about just programs that they had in Latin American countries and their alliances with Latin American NGOs to implement these policies. And so, I could kind of feel the tension in the room. There were about 100 people or more in the room. It was a packed room. It was at full capacity or more. And as I was sitting there, there was a woman next to me who had been to our session, to our presentation, who had come up after the presentation that I gave, which was advocating for comprehensive sexuality education policies. And she had asked me, what do you think of abstinence-only sex education policies? And at this session, she was sitting next to me on her smartphone, composing this really long response on her notepad, and I knew she was going to have something to say that was just controversial. I just knew it was coming. So the first woman, I want to show you all the questions that were asked during this session, but the first question that was asked was by a woman from Mexico City, and she stood up very, very angrily and plucked and said, why are you promoting comprehensive sexuality policies in Latin America when you don't even have those in your own country? The panel was just like, whoa! So they really did not, I think they were very shocked to be getting these responses. And what they said, the woman who responded, she responded very diplomatically and said, we have alliances with Latin American NGOs who are working with their governments to implement these policies. And we really think this is an instance where the global north can look to the global south for progressive policies. And the woman just responded and said, well, we don't appreciate that. We don't appreciate those being here. So it continued with the woman who was sitting next to me, who then stood up and said, what do you have to say about Planned Parenthood's historical involvement in the eugenics movement and its concentration in minority communities? And before the panel could even respond, someone in the audience piped up and said, the reason that Planned Parenthood is concentrated in minority communities is because the people living there would not have access to basic health care if they weren't there. And so just so much tension in this session. I was just kind of sitting there like, I'm not going to say anything. Oh my gosh, because so again, you can learn about this in a classroom and I can tell you about it here, but it's so different being there in person, which I think was really what I got out of being at CSW, was being in the midst of kind of these controversies that you're hearing about in the news. You're hearing about them every day, but being in the midst of them. And I want to continue by showing you all kind of some visual representations of what was also happening in terms of reproductive health just in New York City in general when we were there. So if you'll see this flyer here, this is a flyer that we kind of were, the group of us was being handed out really starting at the beginning of CSW, I would say. And it was by I guess it was an anti-abortion group, religious group, I believe, right? Okay, yeah. And so when I did not know that when I got the flyer though, and so when I saw the flyer, you'll notice that it's saying a woman's right to choose, and that's generally a rhetoric that's kind of used with the pro-choice movement. It's generally connected with that. But when you get towards the bottom of the flyer, you see that it's womenforlife.org, and it's director of the National Helpline for Abortion Recovery and Women for Life International. So you're seeing that it's not at all a pro-abortion or pro-choice group. And so this was something I hadn't encountered before, was seeing kind of the rhetoric of the pro-choice movement being used by the pro-life movement. And so that was something that was, again, if I had not read that more in depth, I wouldn't have known that. And so they were also passing out a book and a lot of different things. And so this was even added to by this huge billboard that was up in Soho while we were in New York. And we did not see this. I actually saw this in a taxi cab on my way somewhere. They have like the news playing in taxi cabs now, which is, I hadn't seen that before when I was in New York. But I was being taken somewhere and I saw this news story and it said, oh, this billboard was being taken down in Soho that had been up for a few weeks. And what it says is, the most dangerous place for an African American is in the womb. And so this was another anti-abortion group that was basically equating the abortion of African American children to like a genocide against the African American race. And yes, so it was just, and it was, I don't really know who was involved in taking it down, but it was taken down, and it is true that African American women do have the highest rates of abortion in the United States. but this group was obviously very against that and was equating that with racism and genocide against African Americans. So this was just a very contentious issue while up at CSW, and I didn't really expect it to be otherwise, but I also didn't expect it to be at the level that it was, and I couldn't have, I've taken a lot of courses about sexual and reproductive health. It really matters to me as a doula, and as someone who works with minority communities and women in general, but I just had never expected for it to be at this level, and I think it really is mirroring the arguments that we're seeing right now in the US.